Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to talk about conflict. And conflict was one of the ones that I saw on your top 10 world issues. So a lot of you had conflict on it. So we're going to talk about a little bit of conflict in the 21st century. So, conflict is the struggle or clash between opposing forces, ideas, and interests. And generally, you hope this gets resolved peacefully, but usually, this is not always the case in a lot of these things. Although conflicts do have three outcomes, an acceptable solution is found. Parties learn to live peacefully in an adversarial state without need to move into adversarial action, or it gets worse and it ends in armed conflict. So, for example, an acceptable solution would be the solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which ended peacefully and did not start World War III. Learn to live peacefully, of course, ends up with the Cold War. And then armed conflict can be argued for all of the, well, not all of the, but both of the world wars. Ends in conflict, to give you a little bit of context of it. So one of the issues of conflict that is happening currently and right now is the claims to the Arctic or Arctic sovereignty. Now, you may be asking, what exactly am I talking about? Well, as part of the consequences of our global warming and our climate change, the Arctic is melting. Land and resources and things that were once under the ice are being revealed, and this has now become something that could be used by countries. Because up until this point, nobody actually had claim to the Arctic because nobody really wanted it because it was just ice. There's nothing there. So, there's no one's claiming the Arctic, but now there are countries that border the Arctic that are trying to lay claim to the Arctic, including Russia, Denmark, Canada. So the Russians, for example, put a flag on the bottom of the ocean, which technically you can't do, but they did it anyway. Denmark and Canada have both claimed to a seabed between Greenland and Ellesmere Island, which you can see in this little map here. There's Ellesmere Island, and both Denmark and Canada have agreed, because this is Canada here, of course. So here it is right here. At the time, Prime Minister Harper announced the intention to build a deepwater port and training base on Baffin Island, and 6 ice-breaking armed Navy ships. But with a Navy in the north, again, it comes down to Northwest Passage issues. So Arctic sovereignty is an issue in Canada. So in terms of conflict, we have hard power, which is a country's ability to affect change militarily, and soft power, which is a country's ability to affect change without violence, and negotiation. So pretty much exactly what it says, hard and soft powers. So hard power is the use of military force. In the old days, this is what we called gunboat diplomacy. Basically, whoever has the biggest stick wins. Britain first, and then the United States. You could literally park ships off the coast and then shoot into the country, which was terrible, but that's what it was. The U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt famously said, "Walk softly and carry a big stick." And he created the Great White Fleet, and this is part of the U.S. strength in the Navy. And then, of course, World War II still had the belief that battleships were the most important ship you could get. After the war, of course, this is no longer the case. It had all shifted to the air and aircraft carriers. So this was this idea of hard power, that if you had the most technology and you had the biggest weapons and the biggest military, then no one was going to mess with you, which is untrue, as we've seen time and time again. In terms of soft power, we do have co-option, moving countries closer to one another, so you lose the sense to want to fight. Think back to the beginning of the course and our Big Mac Index and our McDonald's case studies, and how countries who are similar won't fight because they have too much to lose at the time. We've got public diplomacy. You want to look good for the world. You don't want to come off as a jerk. If you're Trump, of course, this does not apply, but generally that's there. The government diplomacy, using governmental channels to settle disputes. Of course, money. Money always talks. Bribes, obviously. And then sanctions. If they don't do what you want, you punish them economically. and ideally they will fold at that point. Force is a hard power. Nowadays, conflicts tend to be between very strong states and a much weaker opponent, and this is called asystematic warfare. Generally, you don't see Americans going to battle against Canadians. Similar. So you would see Americans going to battle against, well, Middle East, which is asystematic because they don't have nearly the technology or weapons the Americans have. They did hold their own for quite a long time, though. So what causes conflict? What are some of the causes of conflict? Well, let's take a look here. Natural resources, huge cause of conflict. Oil is a huge resource. Oil is a big one. Everyone wants oil. Water is probably coming next because there is a lot of people in the world and there's not a lot of fresh water for them to drink. And oil and natural gases are being discovered all over the world, and places that were important before are becoming more important now. For example, like we talked about in our northern sovereignty claims, as well as the South China Sea, which is cause for conflict because oil and gas are tremendously important for power. Territorial conflicts, when two or more groups lay claim to the same land, and of course the big one is Israel and Palestine, which has been going on since the end of World War II, when the UN gave the Israeli people a country that people were already living on. So that is territorial is a big one and still going on. Cultural conflict, of course. This is a big one. Canada is a big example of this one because of our issues with the Indigenous people of Canada, who've sorely mistreated, as well as poorly helped. And we've had cultural conflicts in Canada. With the Indigenous people, the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, and it's ongoing, and it's not good. Much like the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, in Canada, the Indigenous movement is one that has been ignored for far too long, and it's another issue that we have in terms of cultural conflicts. And again, huge topic. Not going to cover it here. Hopefully, going to cover it in another one, but this is a big one. Religious conflict, of course. There's not a lot I need to tell you about religious conflict. Religious conflict has been going on pretty much since man began to believe in religion. You don't believe in what I believe in? Well, I'm going to kill you for it. And that's kind of how it is. It's been the root of more evil, I think, than money. And it's a big one. So religious conflict is always there. Global geopolitical conflict is when we start using the term proxy war. Sometimes there's a fight in a country just because of two bigger countries fighting over that country. Of course, a big one would be North Korea. After World War II, again, the North was aided by the Soviets and People's Republic of China. The South was supported by the U.S. and this idea of democracy and capitalism. And look at what happened there. They are still divided, and technically the war is still going on. Longest running war in history. It was only an armistice sign. They never signed a peace treaty, so that's why the country is still divided into North and South Korea at this moment in time. Another big one is the Vietnam War, where something similar happened. It was between the U.S. Fighting the Viet Cong, who were supported again by the Soviets, and basically it was a Cold War proxy war, and this is what we call it. In the 80s, the Soviets, of course, then got into the Soviet-Afghan War, which ended up ultimately ruining the Soviet Union. And in South America, again, you have ages of South America being supported by the U.S. In terms of this proxy war. So proxy wars are detrimental to the people within it, but they're also much higher stakes game in terms of the larger powers that are supporting either side. When we talked about those causes, usually you have a mixture of causes of the war. In the Soviet-Afghan War, we actually see all five: natural resources, territory, culture, religion, and geopolitics. Natural resources, of course, because Afghanistan had minerals and energy products, including oil. Territorial, because the Soviet Union wanted access to the ocean, access to the Indian Ocean. Cultural, a lot of Afghans did not like the cultural way of the Russians. Religious, Afghans were traditionally Islamic. The Soviet Union was secular. And geopolitics, this was a Cold War proxy war. So you have all five in this instance. When we get into conflict is very costly. It costs money. it costs lives, it costs energy, it costs culture. You get leftovers, you get consequences. Every dollar spent on military weaponry and troops is money not spent on economic development within that country, or education, or sustainable and globalization of that country. Weapons are extremely expensive. One of the insane things about this is these weapons, because they're building new ones every day, a lot of these hard powers actually end up selling their weapons to a lot of these other countries, some power weapons of course, but they sell them nonetheless, and then you find these on the markets for about $100, which is insane. This is just insane. So conflicts cost a lot of money. So that's kind of the basics for conflicts, and there's some of the conflicts in right now, and I want you to, in this assignment, you're going to investigate a little more about some of the current conflicts of the world, and how they represent what's going on. Okay, so that's it for this lecture on conflicts, and we'll see you in the next.